Namaskar and thanks for tuning in to the Economic Brief, the weekly program that tracks major economy-related stories from an Indian perspective of the world. On the program, India's GDP surge of 7.8% in Q1 of this fiscal sets the momentum to think, invest big in India. Prime Minister Modi sees strengthened multilateralism as the SCO's beacon, a multipolar Asia for a multipolar world. India begins a new phase of GST, two slabs, 5% and 18%, and a 40% slab on sin goods, aerated drinks among them. Nestle CEO sacked over office dalliance, corporate world enforcing key professional boundaries. Well, before we move into our top story on India's GDP numbers for the first quarter, let's set the stage for the story by listening to the Chief Economic Advisor to the Finance Ministry, Dr. Anantha Nageshwaran. He's explaining the message behind this data, and he also speaks about the tariff issue not lasting for long.
The surprising and the pleasing outcome of the GDP data was the strength noticed in manufacturing services and government consumption. So I think this augurs well, because we also saw that the numbers are sustaining themselves into the second quarter as well in terms of July data. There will be an impact, particularly on the external sector side, because of the tariff impact on export growth, which might spill over into domestic production and also domestic capital formation, etc. But I think the slowdown, whatever we may see in the second quarter and possibly in the third quarter, it will be relatively contained, and it may be temporary and transitory, because the uncertainty related to the tariff, in my view, will not necessarily continue for too long.
So let's try and understand this in some detail. India's GDP surge, it's driving the growth story. And let's, talk about the figures. Real GDP grew by 7.8% in Q1 of FY 25-26. And India's is projected, the projected GDP for India by 2030 is going to be $7.3 trillion. Let's zoom in to the actual figures for this. The real GDP in Q1 of FY 25-26 is at 47.89 lakh crore rupees. That's about $563 billion for this quarter. And the real GDP in Q1 of FY 24-25, 1 year ago, was about 44.42 lakh crore rupees. That's $522 billion. So you can see a 7.8% jump from there. We'll move on to our next slide now. And we are looking here at the trajectory, because when we look at this and cast it on a larger picture, we look at the big picture, the projected GDP of rupees 426 lakhs 45,000 crore rupees. That's a huge sum of money. If we're talking about $5 trillion, that's going to be India's GDP by 2027. If we continue to grow like this, the projected GDP of rupees 620,500, 50,000, I beg you, 620 lakhs 50,000 crore rupees, 620 lakhs 50,000 crore rupees. That's US dollars 7.3 trillion by the year 2030. So these are the size of the figures that we're talking about. But primarily, what's driven this growth in the Q1? We can see that the primary sector is up 3.7%. The primary sector is agriculture, livestock, forestry, fishing, mining, and the like. The secondary sector is also up 7.7%. This is the big sector: manufacturing, electricity, gas, water supply, utilities, construction amongst them. And then the tertiary sector is up 9.3%. This is the sector of services. We have trade, hotels, transport, communication, professional services, public administration, defense, and the like. Some of the positive indicators, we can see that 170 million jobs have been created over the past decade. Why are people wanting to invest in India? We are looking at the picture. What are the positive indicators coming in? And we can see that much of that employment is actually coming from rural India. Rural India shows 96% rise in female employment as well. So this is the inclusive agenda at play. Other positive indicators, we know GST reforms. One of them just came out as of this very month. And inclusive agenda, I did talk to you about some of that inclusive agenda. We can see there is, apart from GST, which is facilitating the movement of goods and services, there are programs like Make in India, Jan Dhan, and the like. There is a focused goal, as we can see, Viksit Bharat by the year 2047. So we're moving in a direction, and that is a clear vision in a sense, clear thinking. If we look at what is crowding in investment as well, we can see that CapEx has been very strong in the year 2024-25 to the order of about 10.52 trillion rupees. And that we also know in the same financial year, FY 24-25, we saw about $81 billion in foreign investment coming into India. India now looking at a target of annual FDI inflows of about $100 billion. Every year we're hoping to get about $100 billion. We move on to our next slide now. And here we look at the supply expansion as well as demand growth. This is important, the HSBC Purchasing Managers Index. It is at 59.3 in August last month. 59.3 is well above 50, so that shows plenty of expansion. And the important part is that it is the highest level it has reached since 2008. That is the highest level in the last 17 years. And continuing to increase is private consumption, which is driving growth. So that is that demand which is going to increase now even with the GST reforms. So that private consumption is important. The IIP growth rate for the month of July 2025 was at 3.5%. And of the industries included in this, 14 of the 23 industry groups saw positive growth. So we are seeing that India is seeing positive growth on a wide, broad spectrum. We move on to our next slide, and this is our final slide for this presentation. We look at the forex position of India. India on July 18 of 2025 had foreign exchange reserves of $695.5 billion. Now this is, in fact, these figures are inclusive of cash plus gold plus SDR. And the important part also is that it had crossed $700 billion on the 27th of June, 2025. So before we get views of our expert on this story, let's listen to India's Information and Broadcasting Minister. He's speaking about the GST reforms and what they do for the Indian economy.
It's a matter of great joy for all of us that Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji has decided to reduce the GST rates for practically everything that is used in the lives of our middle class families and our low income families. Starting from food items to items which are used in day-to-day life, to students, items which are required by our students, to the items which are used in our homes, whether it is consumer electronics, small cars, scooters, everything is now going to see a lower GST rate from the first day of Navratri. I would like to thank Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji for this big step, a major reform which is going to help each and every family in our country.
And Prasenjit Basu, economist and author, is with us in the studio, and he helps us break this down. Thank you very much, Mr. Basu, for being with us. So India's GDP growth of 7.8% in Q1 of this fiscal is what, above expectation, you would say. But what confidence does it give investors despite the headwinds that we're talking about?
Well, it's a great source of comfort that the economy is still growing much faster than anybody else in the world. And there, of course, are headwinds, and the key one, of course, is the 50% tariff imposed by the US on the 27th of August. That is going to hurt our exporters for sure. And so the announcement today of a substantial reduction and simplification of the GST system is a huge positive. It's a long-term positive, and it is also a positive for the cyclical prospects of the economy. It should provide a significant boost to private consumption because pretty much all GST rates have been cut, and they've been cut to just 2 rates, which is really good. I mean, I have been an advocate of having a single GST, which is what most countries do. We now have 2, 18 and 5. And in effect, we also have a 0. There's a lot of stuff that has been removed from GST altogether. Unfortunately, there is a third too, which is called the sin rate. That used to be 50. It's come down to 40. So for everything, there's a reduction. That should provide a significant boost to consumption. And it'll also reduce prices of pretty much everything.
Okay, indeed.
Now, inflation is now at 1.5% already. The headline inflation rate is 1.5%. And it is likely to come down probably to near 0 by October, which basically provides ample room for the RBI to cut interest rates substantially further.
Okay.
So you'll get a triple whammy. You'll get GST reductions, interest rate cuts, and you've also got, remember, the reductions in personal income tax rates this year. So
indeed,
private consumption, I think, is going to see a very significant boost. And that is all to the good. It'll help to offset the negative impact of the tariff. But I think what is interesting is that with this overall boost, we are likely to, many more industries will be able to achieve scale economies because of the stronger consumption that comes through.
Absolutely.
And, I think if we can get an FTA with the European Union, then even the export story will receive a medium-term fillip.
But since we are talking about growth and 7.8% in Q1, and how do you look at this GST 2.0 in that trajectory? Is it a scheme that's going to really push India to that 5 trillion mark, 7.3 trillion mark that we were talking about?
Absolutely. I wasn't surprised by 7.8%. My forecast for GDP growth this year has been 8%, actually above 8%. I would have expected around 8.5%, but the tariff, the 50% tariff imposed by the US on about half of our exports to the US is a setback. And that basically means that we'll probably struggle to get 8%. But I think the GST cuts, the substantial reduction in GST, puts us back on track for 8.5 to 9% GDP growth this year, real GDP growth.
Okay.
Now, unfortunately, we keep talking about 6.5%. But if you look at the last 4 years, average growth has been 8.2%. Even with that 6.5% growth last year, which is a slowdown. If you have a low base of 6.5%, the following year you're likely to get 8 or 9% growth. Okay. So, that is the momentum of the economy. Over the last 4 years, we've done 8.2%, and you see it in other things. If you look at, I was just looking at car production globally. Car production has always been flat globally over the last 5 years. India's car production is up 49% over that. So if you look at steel production, world steel production is flat in the last 4 years since 2020. Last year, okay, India's steel production was 47% higher than in 2020. China's steel production is down, world steel production is down. India is the only one of the top 10 steel producers in the world that is increasing at all. So, the evidence that the Indian economy is growing is abundant. It's not as if, we just have to look at our GDP numbers and start questioning them.
Let's move on to our next story. Stay with us, Mr. Basu. Now, Prime Minister Narendra Modi called the SCO a guiding light for multilateralism and inclusivity at the Tianjin summit on September 1. He emphasized India's belief in connectivity as a path to trust, trade and development. So the SCO, it was once 6 Eurasian nations, now includes 10 members and 16 observers. And Prime Minister's comments assume significance in the light of the East continuing to be the growth engines actually for the global economy. In Tianjin, Prime Minister Narendra Modi delivered a message that resonated far beyond the walls of the summit hall. He declared that the Shanghai Cooperation Organization can be a guiding force for multilateralism and a more inclusive global order. This wasn't just a diplomatic statement, it was a call to action for reform of global institutions like the UN to better reflect the voices of the global south, often underrepresented in decision-making.
SCO, multilateralism और इंक्लूसिव वर्ल्ड ऑर्डर का मार्गदर्शक बन सकता है। मुझे खुशी है कि इस महत्वपूर्ण विषय पर आज एक स्टेटमेंट जारी किया जा रहा है। भारत का हमेशा से मत रहा है कि मजबूत कनेक्टिविटी से केवल व्यापार ही नहीं बल्कि विश्वास और विकास के द्वार भी खुलते हैं। इसी सोच के साथ हम चाबहार पोर्ट और इंटरनेशनल नॉर्थ साउथ ट्रांसपोर्ट कॉरिडोर जैसे इनिशिएटिव पर काम कर रहे हैं।
The center of gravity in global affairs is shifting steadily towards the east. Prime Minister Narendra Modi envisions the SCO as more than a regional alliance. It can be a strategic counterbalance to unilateralism, especially in matters of trade and security. By encouraging cooperation among diverse member states, the SCO can foster a multipolar world, one where power isn't concentrated in the hands of a few. India and China are major economies of Asia and will deliver this change.
There was recognition of the role that the Indian and the Chinese economies can play in stabilizing world trade. Both leaders underlined the need once again to proceed from a political and strategic direction to reduce their bilateral trade deficit, facilitate bilateral trade and investment ties in both directions, and increase policy transparency and predictability.
Representing over 40% of the global population and contributing 23.6% of global nominal GDP, rising to 33.8% when measured by purchasing power parity, the SCO commands serious market influence. Intra-block trade is accelerating, climbing from $463 billion in 2021 to $725 billion in 2024. With major economies like China, India, and Russia at its core, the potential for coordinated economic impact is undeniable. But scale doesn't equal synergy. Despite its collective heft, the SCO faces structural hurdles, competing national interests, asymmetrical economies, and the absence of a unified trade framework. It's a bit like a world-class orchestra with great soloists, but still searching for a common score. The Economic Brief, DD India. Well, Prasanjit Basu continues to be with us. Mr. Basu, how well poised is the SCO to deal with, the economic issues? India, China, and Russia have a convergence of interests, especially at the current time.
The SCO hasn't really been a dynamic organization. We need to admit that. Central Asian republics like Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, some of them have some elements of dynamism, but many of them are struggling. So, and of course, Russia has been hamstrung by the war with Ukraine for the last 3.5 years. So, there is potential in the SCO, but it certainly is not an alternative to, for instance, the Quad as a security entity. But I think what is interesting with the economy is that there is an opportunity, I think, for India to increase its trading relationships with the Central Asian republics, with Russia, and with China. China takes only 1/6 of our exports relative to the US. Our exports to the US are 6 times what the exports to China are. That surely will change. I think it was interesting that the the right-hand man of Xi Jinping had a private meeting with Prime Minister Modi as well. So it is worth noting that Shahbaz Sharif, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, was almost ignored at both SCO and the military parade. So it seems that China is reaching out to India, is trying to deepen ties, using the opportunity of deteriorating US-India relations to push better ties with India.
Indeed.
We need to use this opportunity to oblige China to import far more from us,
Okay.
to transfer technology and stop being an impediment for technicians and other experts to come to iPhone manufacturing facilities run by the Taiwanese companies, as well as by Tata Electronics. So what is required is an improvement in ties. That seems to be forthcoming.
Yes.
And there will be benefits to both sides. And I think we need to make better use of the SCO as a market. So if you look at Russia, for instance, the car market in Russia was abandoned by all the Western brands,
Right.
and the Chinese brands went right in. The Indians, the Tatas and Mahindras, did not. Citing
They require wheels for the winter.
Yes, not all of Russia though.
Okay.
They do, but that can be provided too. It's not impossible.
Fair enough.
That they have their own. China doesn't have as harsh winters either. So
Right.
the Chinese can go in. Why can't we? We need
Fair
to.
enough.
Similarly with Central Asia, with Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, where we have historic ties, we need to develop the economic aspects of that.
We leave it there. Thank you very much, Mr. Prasanjit Basu. Thank you for enlightening us on these two stories. Our next story is about the GST, and Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman on Wednesday announced tax cuts on hundreds of consumer items ranging from soaps to small cars to spur domestic demand in the face of economic headwinds from the US tariffs. The GST Council approved lowering taxes on everyday items and simplifying the tax structure. Let's look at the highlights. India's GST system has been transformed after the GST Council adopted what is being dubbed as GST 2.0. These reforms aim to simplify the tax structure, increase consumption demand, and make compliance easier for businesses. The previous 4-tier system has been replaced by just 5% and 18%, with a 40% tax on discouraged items. Essentials like milk, paneer, flatbreads, plant-based milk are now tax-free or taxed at 5%. All medicines and medical devices now attract 5% GST, with some essential drugs at 0%.
Drugs and medicines, and they all come down from 12 to 0. From 5 to 0 and 3 life-saving drugs and medicines used for treatment of cancer, rare diseases, and other severe chronic diseases.
Life and health insurance policies are fully exempt from GST. GST on items like sprinklers and threshers reduced to 5%. Tax cut from 12% to 5% on renewable energy products, boosting clean energy adoption. Luxury goods, SUVs, racing cars, yachts, and personal aircraft now fall under the 40% slab. So do tobacco products and other goods considered harmful for health, like aerated and caffeinated drinks. Casinos and online gaming are also taxed at 40%, reflecting their classification as sin goods.
All goods, including aerated waters, containing added sugar or other sweetening matter, or flavored, caffeinated beverages, carbonated beverages, or fruit drink, or carbonated beverages with fruit juice and other non-alcoholic beverages, excluding those specified at lower rates, will all be covered under 40%.
Reduced GST on cement and materials may cut costs on building homes by 3 to 5%. Clearer slab structure improves transparency and boosts buyer confidence.
I'd like to appeal to all of you that unless we pass on all these benefits of GST to the consumers, and I'd urge you all to resolve that the entire benefit will be passed on to the consumer, we will all ensure that we will buy Indian-made products.
There are also reforms on compliance with tech upgrades. These reforms are designed to make GST more transparent, predictable, and business-friendly. The rates also encourage greater purchases of Indian products and encourages exporters to produce for the local market. The Economic Brief, DD India. Well, from corner offices to boardrooms, personal relationships can sometimes spark corporate storms. Nestle, the world's largest food company, has just fired its CEO over an undisclosed romance with a subordinate. A move that has rattled markets and raised questions about conflicts of interest in leadership. We leave you with Diptanshu Kashyap's report. Thanks for watching the Economic Brief. Namaskar.
Almost 2 months after astronomer CEO Andy Byron stepped down over a workplace romance, another global company is in crisis. Nestle has abruptly dismissed its chief executive, Laurent Freixe, after an internal probe uncovered an undisclosed relationship with a direct subordinate. Nespresso head Philippe Navratil has been named as his successor. Freixe, the company veteran, had been in the role for less than a year, tasked with reviving sales amid falling revenues and profits. His sudden ouster has only deepened the crisis, sending shock waves through Nestle's leadership and financial stability. Nestle shares tumbled more than 3.5% when the news broke, before clawing back some ground to close down to 0.74% on Tuesday. But its financial woes predate Freixe's sacking. In 2024, Nestle's revenue slipped 1.8% to 91.35 billion Swiss francs. And this July, profits plunged another 10.3% in the first half of the year, dragged down by sluggish demand in China and soaring cocoa and coffee costs. Nestle's shakeup is far from an isolated case. In recent years, several high-profile executives have been forced out after office relationships blurred professional boundaries. Examples include Bernard Looney, who resigned as CEO of BP, Steve Easterbrook, ousted from McDonald's, Brian Krenich, resigned from Intel, and Harry Stone-Cipher, who left Boeing under similar circumstances. Each case underscored the same concern. When personal ties mix with positions of power, the fallout can rattle investors. So the question arises, why does the corporate world draw such hard lines around office relationships, and what impact can they have on professionalism? According to M-Train, office policies are designed to protect both employees and organizations. They set boundaries to avoid favoritism, bias, and potential harassment claims if relationships end badly. The risks include conflicts of interest when one partner has authority over the other, power dynamics that create perceptions of coercion or favoritism, team disruption as personal ties spill into professional settings, and legal risks if breakups escalate into harassment or retaliation. Workplace relationships aren't new, but when they cross into conflicts of interest, the consequences can be serious, from leadership shakeups to financial setbacks. For companies, managing boundaries is just as important as managing balance sheets. For employees, it's a reminder that policies can sometimes be tougher than deadlines. Diptanshu Kashyap's report for the Economic Brief, DD India.